Hello everyone! Now seems a good time to do a reading update. It's been several months since the last one, and I guess I'm doing these on a quarterly basis now, unofficially. I've read a decent chunk of books, and I'm about to start a new project. Maybe. I was all gung-ho about it last week. Now, not so much. After I've read a couple books, I might change my mind. We'll see. I'm not going to say any more about it. First up, Lord of Misrule by Christopher Lee. This is Sir Christopher Lee's autobiography, the second edition. The first was titled Tall, Dark, and Gruesome. This updated edition includes additional anecdotes about his work on Star Wars and The Lord of the Rings. I mentioned reading this book a few months ago, and I've read excerpts from it on my Ko-fi page, so some of you already know that I thought this was a great autobiography. I don't list Christopher Lee among my favorite actors, but it's always fun when he turns up, and he had a fascinating life, which is why I wanted to read his book. He tells all about his family history, which is wild. He recounts his experiences at school, in the war, after the war, working in covert ops. He tells about becoming an actor and the pitfalls through which he learned his craft. Hilarious stories. But he also talks about how he got into other things, like singing and golf. A lot of golf stories, and the majority of those were amusing. You would think, oh, he talks a lot about golf, that sounds boring. Most of the time, it's not. He's refreshingly candid about himself, about Hollywood, about the ups and downs of his career, and the mixed quality of the films he appeared in. He explains how he got into some of these movies, and he didn't know that they were going to be like that when they were shooting them, that there was some bait and switch that happened on a few movies. He's a wonderful wordsmith, a humble personality, sharp and perceptive, but always gracious, and very, very funny. Number 2 is a reread, The Proposal by Laurie Wick. This is the first of 4 Christian historical romance novels in Wick's English Garden series. I read these a long time ago, my sister had them, and last year I had a hankering to revisit them. Turns out I didn't remember this story as much as I thought I did, but in all fairness, the thing that's always stayed with me the most is that this is where I learned that when you're combing tangled hair, you've got to start at the bottom. And I've thought about this many times since. This first book in the series is about Jennings, a single man preoccupied with his own interests, who suddenly becomes sole guardian of his cousin's young children when they're orphaned. It's a heartwarming story that tugs on the heartstrings while explaining some interesting Christian arguments. It's not exactly heavy on apologetics, but it's more than surface-level faith discussion. There is a romance, of course, but only in the last part of the book. Instead, it keeps its focus on Jennings' relationship with the children and his spiritual journey. Like I said, this is the first of 4 books. It's the only one I'll be talking about in this video. I didn't tear through the rest of the series after reading this one. I decided to take my time with it. I do have the other 3 books because I got all 4 of them for a very good price used on eBay. Number 3 is Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage by Alfred Lansing. This is an account of the 1914 British expedition to cross Antarctica led by Sir Ernest Shackleton. I've owned this book for about a decade, finally read it. The title comes from the name of the ship that carried the party of explorers to the Weddell Sea, where it became trapped and was eventually crushed, leaving the men stranded on ice hundreds of miles from land. But it's also a reference to their physical and psychological tenacity. This story is a great testament to the indomitable human spirit. The situation just gets worse and worse, and they're continually frustrated in their efforts to advance, but there remains a sense of optimism and good-natured camaraderie. There is tragedy and struggle, but also one amazing accomplishment after another, and all of this makes this one of the greatest survival stories in history. Number 4 is a novella, A Christmas Memory by Truman Capote. I read this around Christmas time, obviously. Capote relates certain annual holiday traditions of his childhood when he, at 7 years old, and his friend, an elderly cousin that he lived with, would scrape up enough money to buy the ingredients to make a ton of fruitcakes to give to people, and they'd make each other's gifts, and they'd go get a tree. It's a charming story about an unusual pair, but it's ultimately bittersweet, and there's a thread of sadness that runs through the whole thing as part of the reason why these two bond with each other so deeply is because they're outcasts within their own household. And they just don't fit in with anyone else. I liked it, but it's the kind of thing that makes you feel melancholy. It was accompanied by some gentle watercolor illustrations by Beth Peck. This next one, number 5, is a little book titled A Martian Wouldn't Say That. Urgent Memos TV Execs Wish They Hadn't Written, compiled by Leonard B. Stern and Diane L. Robison. This is a compilation of quirky, ridiculous, and just plain dumb memos that were sent to TV writers, producers, and directors by studio censors and executive producers. It's an amusing collection of notes from yesteryear, many of them exposing how out of touch the people at the top really are. Number 6 is The Fugitive by J.M. Dillard, the novelization of the hit 1993 film, which I haven't seen more than a couple minutes of. I don't like to admit that, because then I know there'll be a score of people who are like, "Oh, you haven't seen that?" I saw a couple of scenes from it on TV. Just hasn't happened, sorry. I have watched the original show in its entirety. Do I get points for that? Oh, there it goes. There's a bit too much foreshadowing in the narration in the beginning part, which made a couple reveals later on not so surprising. The twists would have been more effective if Dillard, which is a pseudonym for Jean Calagridis, had said less. I haven't seen the movie, and these are twists that were not, entire storylines that were not in the original show, so I didn't know what was going to be revealed to be going on all along in the book. I didn't know this beforehand. And yet still, it wasn't really that surprising to me because of some things that were said in the beginning, the opening scenes, that I felt were suspicious, and I was like, gonna put a pin in that. And then I never forgot those pins. It is a page-turner, though, and the cat-and-mouse element between Kimball and Gerard, where Gerard keeps fighting the urge to believe Kimball's innocence, was nicely done on the page. Funny thing, for some reason, I found it easier to read Gerard's lines as Tommy Lee Jones in my head than to read Kimball's lines as Harrison Ford. Number 7 is Little Dorrit by Charles Dickens. I finally did it! I've only had this on my to-do list for, well, since the 2008 miniseries aired on PBS. That was 18 years ago! The story revolves around Amy Dorrit, a selfless young woman who was born in the Marshalsea debtors' prison, where her father has lived for so many years that he's treated like royalty there. That's the premise in a nutshell. Of course, there are a lot of other subplots and characters involved. This is Dickens. A good deal of it was inspired by his own memories of being imprisoned in the Marshalsea, which was closed and partially demolished by the time he wrote his novel. This autobiographical and historical element gives the book a certain edge. The narrative deals in large part with money, people wanting it, people getting it, the effect of riches on the individual and on society. There's a significant storyline about the stock market. Dickens also takes aim at ineffectual bureaucracy, and everything having to do with the Circumlocution Office is ingenious. I will say, though, that I found this one of his most frustrating and infuriating novels, namely because the Dorrits, the Dorrit family, minus Amy and her uncle, are such selfish and insufferable people. I just can't stand them. And I do remember now feeling this way about the miniseries. I haven't seen the 80s version. I will watch it at some point, but I figure it's going to be the same there, just because these people... Ugh. Amy is a saint who puts up with their nonsense and their ill treatment, and it's maddening. There were so many times where I just... Ugh. I also wish that the book had a little more levity. Obviously, it's a heavy story, there are heavy themes, there are really dark things that happen, but one of the things I love about Dickens is his humor and his love of the absurd. And while there are plenty of witty and comedic parts, anytime Flora Finching shows up, for example, it's funny, provided you can decipher her rambling monologues. But I wish there was more, or that the humor was distributed more evenly. I feel like he was a little more light-handed here than usual, and it's not just because this book was written later in his life and he wasn't being as silly anymore, because Our Mutual Friend came after this. I finally tackled that last year, and there were parts that had me rolling around on the floor laughing so hard. I liked that book better than Little Dorrit. I just found it a more enjoyable book, a more enjoyable experience, more engrossing. I found the complexity more rewarding somehow. But that's not to say that Little Dorrit isn't great. I did like it a lot. It's dense, and there were times when I was confused, or I felt like I was getting a little lost in the weeds. The very first chapter, I felt like, I have no idea what's going on here. Who's talking? And what? But I did press onward, and the experience is absolutely worth the time and the concentration that it took to read it. I already did a video on the 2008 miniseries back in 2018, and I probably did that prematurely. In hindsight, I wish I just waited until I had read the book, but, well, it took me all these years to get to that. I probably won't do a re-review comparing the miniseries to the book, but I will say here that I now recognize that the majority of the casting and characterizations were spot on, and I'm impressed that they did justice to so many facets and stages of the story in 14 episodes. There are only a few things that I think back on and say, that's not how it was in the book. I'll also note that I wasn't keen on the edition that I ended up getting from the library. If I had my druthers, I would pick a paperback, since an 840-page book, not including all the front and back matter, is heavy enough without a hardcover. The pages felt nice, but there was a lot of white space, and while the illustrations were included, they were often placed pages away from the scene they were depicting. Number 8 is something quite different, the Griffin and Sabine trilogy by Nick Bantock. Griffin is a postcard artist who receives a card from a woman, Sabine, in the South Pacific, who reveals that she is somehow able to watch him making his art in her mind. They strike up a correspondence, which rapidly develops a feeling of intimacy, and then things take a dark turn. The whole thing is an intriguing concept with a super cool presentation. So each page of the book shows a postcard or a letter. Let me find one of the letters. Here's the first letter. Over there. With the front on one side, and then you turn the page and you can read what's written on the back of the postcard over there. Or, if it's a letter, you turn the page and there is the back of the envelope, which you can open. and take out the actual letter. And there it is. Very cool. This does remind me of S, the collaboration between J.J. Abrams and Doug somebody, I can't remember his last name, which had the book. Well, it all came in a box, and there was the book, and there was the text, and then in the margins, there's two people having a conversation with each other, and then there's all this extra stuff, maps and napkins, and I did an unboxing. It was my second video on the channel, and it blew me away, and I was so excited to read it, and then I actually got to reading it and working on it, and I was like, this is kind of not good. But anyway, this first Griffin and Sabine book was published in 1991, I think, which predates S. I'm not saying that S... Yeah, 1991. I'm not saying that S was a ripoff, but not as original as I thought. I do want to say, though, that this is somewhat deceptive packaging. I know that these look like picture books for children, but they are not for kids. My mom actually picked one of them up, and she was just curious, what are you reading? What is this? And she flipped one open, and the very first page that she flipped it open to was, had a drawing that was more on the adult side, and she was like, I was like, that's probably the worst page you could have opened that up to. Book 1 was intriguing and ends with a cliffhanger. In Book 2, Sabine's notebook, I started to feel restless because of the moony way that these two write. I kind of don't like the guy, and there's something unhealthy about the whole thing. Book 3, The Golden Mean, takes a sinister turn with the introduction of a third party, and also it was nice to have something new introduced. It's a good twist, and added a sense of urgency beyond the passionate yearnings of two artists who have never met. But then the ending left me saying, huh? I didn't understand the last page at all, and I kept flipping back and forth, and then going further back and trying to understand it, and I don't know what happens at the end. Still, it's a very nifty concept. Bantock's own art is unusual but interesting, and the gimmick with the postcards and the letters, with typos and mistakes included, never loses its appeal. Number 9 is Killer Dolphin, also published as Death at the Dolphin by Ngaio Marsh. This is her 24th Roderick Allen mystery. I am not reading these as frequently as I did when I was a teenager, please stay. And yet somehow I found this one very similar to the one I read last year, which focuses on high-strung, temperamental theater people who are all involved with each other putting on a new play. Even if I'd read this one first, though, I still don't think I'd have liked it much. It just wasn't very good. The way the characters talk sounds artificial and more like 1920s dialogue than 1960s dialogue, which is when the book is supposedly set. The mystery didn't hold my interest, and I don't recall ever feeling this way about a Marsh book before, but there was something about the writing that felt super pretentious, and it was very off-putting. Maybe other books have been that way and I just never noticed or minded before, but here, I don't know, there was a certain smugness about all the allusions and the academic conversation and stuff, and it was rough. Number 10 is Tim by Colleen McCullough, a controversial Australian novel about a relationship that develops between a single, well-to-do woman in her 40s and a man in his 20s who has a perfect body but the mind of a child. I don't think I need to explain why that's controversial. A long time ago, I saw some of one of the two adaptations, the TV one with Candice Bergen. But for some reason recently, I can't remember what led me here, I found myself looking up the book, and I became curious enough to check it out. Going into it, I was skeptical, and I was like, at the first sign of anything sordid or predatory, I'm putting it down. I don't want anything to do with that. And through the first couple chapters, I was on edge, and I felt uncomfortable because each time I turned a page, I was like, what's gonna happen? But I kept going because I found I really liked the style of the writing. McCullough has some great metaphors in here. And I quickly realized the story and the way that the story is told was much more tasteful than I'd anticipated. And there's a lot more to it than I thought at the outset. It takes a gradual and sensitive approach, spends a lot of time on development and growth, and by the end, I came to feel that, okay, this is a strange situation, but in this specific case, with this particular man as he is now, and this particular woman, it kind of works. Now, maybe McCullough's writing is just that persuasive, whatever. It's a complicated story, it's bittersweet. I felt complex and conflicted emotions, but I liked the book. Number 11 is Vanished, America's Most Mysterious Kidnappings, Castaways, and the Forever Lost by Sarah Pruitt. This is a survey of famous disappearances that examines cases of individuals like Amelia Earhart, Jimmy Hoffa, D.B. Cooper, Ambrose Bierce, the escapees from Alcatraz, as well as lost ships and groups like the Mary Celeste, the USS Cyclops, Flight 19, the Roanoke Colony, the Franklin Expedition. I think I found the ships and groups section the most intriguing. It was actually the USS Cyclops story that brought me here, but every case was interesting. The book is nicely presented with wide, glossy pages and lots of photos, including newspaper clippings. It's somewhere between a coffee table book and a reference book, and I think it's for general audiences, not just kids. And it provides enough info to give you a firm grasp on the details in each case so that you come away feeling thoroughly informed, but it also leads you to want to do some of your own research via documentaries or books on the ones that you find most fascinating. At least that's how it was for me. There were at least half a dozen different things that I felt like, I'm gonna go read more about that. Number 12 is Geneva by Richard Armitage. Yes, that Richard Armitage. It's a thriller about a scientist who's just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's when she is invited to a conference in Geneva where a groundbreaking new treatment will be unveiled that may cure her disease. It's decent for a debut novel. It maintains a quick pace and never gets bogged down. There are some good twists. It's kind of neo-noirish in a certain aspect, if that term can be applied to literature. There's something in there that's kind of sleazy. Unfortunately, while it was definitely readable and I tore through it very quickly, I found the writing itself kind of blah. It's not awful, it's just kind of unremarkable. I learned about this book because I saw this on the new releases shelf at my library, and I was like, Richard Armitage? Is he writing books now? So I did a little research and I found out that this one came first, and it had some rave reviews, and it sounded interesting, so I decided to start there. Am I going to read that other book now? Probably not. I didn't love this. The other book's plot doesn't sound that interesting to me, and the reviews aren't very good. By the way, I noticed that the About the Author blurb mentions all these other things he's been in, but leaves out North and South. What the heck? I know that was early in his career, and I know he was wary of the Colin Firth Mr. Darcy effect on his career, and I know that BBC actors who want to make it to Hollywood sometimes dismiss or poo-poo their early work on BBC costume dramas, but come on. North and South put him on the map. I dare say there are millions of women, and some men, who wouldn't know who Richard Armitage is if not for that. And we loved him in that movie, not just because of his looks and his voice and all of that, but because he gave a wonderful, starring performance. So, why isn't it on this list? Especially because, okay, so it lists Captain America, the first Avenger. Didn't he have a tiny part in that? And Ocean's 8, which, smallish supporting role, I guess, as one of the only men in the movie, it was something, and there's a ton of stars in that movie, but it wasn't very good. Give it some credit, for Pete's sake, that's all I'm saying. Those are all the books I've read lately. There's an equal number of books that I started and set aside because I realized I didn't want to read them, but we don't need to go over all of those titles. I hope you enjoyed this collection of book reviews. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll be back with a movie review next Saturday. Thanks for watching. Bye!